Hello there and welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass. My name is Hugh Dellar and I'm a teacher trainer and coursebook writer based in North London. I'm also the co-founder of the online language school and teacher development provider Lexical Lab. What I'm going to be talking about today is what we do as teachers when we try to teach vocabulary in the classroom. I'm going to be talking a bit about the way I've come to rethink what we do when we're doing vocabulary teaching, and what I've come to believe is best practice in the English language classroom when it comes to presenting and dealing with new vocabulary that emerges in class. So, as you can see, by the way, please do check out our content here. When I first trained to be a teacher back in 1993, I did a 1-month TEFL course, what's now called a CELTA course. And to be honest, I wasn't really told very much about how to deal with new vocabulary that came up in class. Basically, all I was told was always write new words up on the board. And I took this very literally. I can remember in one of my early teaching jobs, I was observed by my director of studies, and I had to do a lesson on phrasal verbs with an upper intermediate class. And as students were going through the exercises and checking their answers, and I was clarifying whether they were right or wrong, I was basically making a mental note of things that students had problems with. And I was writing up on the board kind of decontextualised versions of the language that had come up in the exercise, cut out and removed from the context which the exercise had provided it with. And instead, what students got on the board was things like to fall out with somebody, to break into something, to get away with something, to arrest somebody for something, and to charge somebody with something. And I was always told to write to when you were presenting a verb so that students knew, oh, it's a verb. Even though I now realise nobody actually walks around saying, to fall out with somebody. It's not really what we do with the language, but this was the way I was trained to think about presenting. I was also pretty bad back then, I think, at dealing with explanation. So when I had to explain something like to fall out with somebody, I would say, if you fall out with somebody, you have a big argument with them. If you break into a flat, you do this. And I would act out kicking a door down. And then I would say something like, and if you steal the TV, you get away with it. And I would mime running off down the road carrying a TV. Maybe if the police arrest you for the crime, they get you like this. And I would act this out. And then they charge you with the crime. And this involved minimal contextualization. And to be honest, quite minimal explanation of the language in context. But a lot of high drama acting and running around the classroom. And students seemed quite happy with this. My students often told me, you're very dynamic. And at the time, I took that as a compliment. I've now come to realise what they actually meant was, you're not really explaining things very clearly, but we quite enjoy watching you run around the classroom like an idiot. But I didn't know that at that point in my teaching career. What I then started to notice was the kinds of mistakes that students of mine would make in the classroom. And I started to realise that I was somehow complicit in the kinds of mistakes they were making. So students would come to class and say things like, sorry, Hugh, I have matter. And I would look vaguely disgusted and say, you've got matter. Ooh, what kind of matter? That sounds like a medical problem, coachy, rather than an English language problem. And then he would sort of correct it and say, I have a bit of a matter. So what are you talking about? My student would then say, what's the matter? So, what's the matter is I can't understand what you're talking about. Then he said, what's the matter? Problem. And I suddenly realized, last week I taught what's the matter. and I explained what's the matter means what's the problem, and my students obviously thought matter equals problem. I've got a bit of a problem. I've got a bit of a matter. Well, what's the matter means what's the problem, but you can't have a bit of a matter. The word doesn't work like that. In the same way, students would sort of realize that problem was sort of similar to matter, but also sort of similar to trouble. Like, I had some trouble with my computer. I had a problem with my computer, but not I had a trouble in the train. Close, but the word doesn't work like that. I would have upper intermediate students who would say things like, will you join the afternoon social program this day? And I would sort of think, oh, it's wrong on so many levels. It's not how we use will. You don't really join social programs. And yes, you can say this morning, and you can say this afternoon and this evening, but you can't say this day. Students would turn up late and say, sorry, I'm late. I got lost my way. And again, you can lose your way and you can get lost, but you can't get lost my way. I also had a student who came in one day and told me, yesterday I fell out with my boyfriend. And I said, oh no, are you talking again now? Have you made up? And she said, yeah, we never stopped talking. We just fell out. And again, I realized that this was a problem of my own explanations and my own examples, because I'd just told my class, if you fall out with someone, you have a big argument to fall out with somebody. I would have students who would say things like, I forgot my wallet in the canteen. Well, in English, you can forget things, but you leave things on the bus, or you leave things at home, or you leave things in the canteen. Someone got away with it. Well, again, from my explanation, that was a perfectly logical assumption about how that word might work. Obviously, what they mean is, I left my wallet in the canteen. Someone must have stolen it. I think someone has stolen it. You don't get away with wallets that you find in the canteen. It's not what we use the word to do. And so I started to become much more aware of the kinds of problems my students were having using words that we'd sort of covered. And I think the problem was really that the students kind of got the meanings, okay? They understood that matter was like trouble, was like problem. They understood that leaving something somewhere was a bit like forgetting it. They understood that having a big argument was a bit like falling out with somebody. They understood that stealing something was a bit like getting away with something. So the meanings were kind of generally in the right ballpark. But what the students didn't know enough about was two crucial things, I think, which was collocation, which words go with other words. So what kind of things can you get away with? What kinds of things do you lose? What can you leave where? What happens when you fall out with somebody? So they didn't know enough about the way in which those words work similarly. The co-locations of those words next to other words. And they also didn't know enough about colligation, which is the kind of grammatical patterns that words take. And often these can be different from one language to another language, okay? So in lots of languages, for example, things like the word happen will be passive. So students will say things like, something was happened, something bad has been happened, which is quite logical because things don't happen themselves. They are happened by other people. But in English, the word happen doesn't colligate like that. It colligates actively, not passively. So in English, bizarrely, things happen. Shops open, not are opened. Shops just open on their own, magically, because the verb colligates actively, not passively. And you see this time and time again with students, where they'll say things like, my father wants that I study business. Well, they've understood the words there. They're using the present simple correctly. what they're not doing is recognizing that the way want colligates in English is different. You don't want that somebody does something, you want someone to do something. And so these kinds of issues of collocation and colligation cause all kinds of problems. And looking back on it, they were problems that I wasn't helping students with in the classroom because I wasn't addressing them through my explanations or through my board work. A few years after I qualified as a teacher, I came across a wonderful novel by a Jewish New Yorker called Jonathan Safran Foer. And the book is called Everything is Illuminated. And in this book, he tells the story, a fictional story, of a Jewish New Yorker who goes to Ukraine to try to retrace his family's roots and find out what happened to his grandparents, why they fled Ukraine and what led them to New York. And in order to help him on his trip to Ukraine, he hires a translator. And in the book, you get these lovely fictional, but very realistic feeling letters from this translator. And when I first read them, I think what really made me laugh out loud about them was the fact that they reminded me of essays that lots of my Cambridge Advanced or Cambridge Proficiency students had tried to write over the years. Usually the students who didn't do any writing until about 3 weeks before the exam, and then they panicked and came in with these piles of exam papers and said, you know, Hugh, can you mark these? And I would look at them just thinking, oh, basically, I just needed to get my red pen and cross everything out and rewrite it because it's all wrong. You know, you're using the language wrong. And this was what these letters were like. So you get things like this. I hanker for this letter to be good. Like, you know, I am not first rate with English. In Russian, my ideas are asserted abnormally well, but my second tongue is not so premium. What's interesting about this is essentially none of the mistakes here are grammatical, okay? If you were a grammar obsessed teacher, you might just change I undertaked to I undertook, okay? But still, it's ridiculous English, you know. If you are not happy with what I've performed, I command you to return it back to me. I will persevere to toil on it until you are appeased. And I guess what's interesting is this is kind of what happens when students use thesauruses, when they learn the meaning of words without learning enough about the contexts in which they're used, when they understand meanings of words, but they don't know enough about colligation or about collocation. And again, when I read this, I mean, it instinctively felt bizarre. So something like, I will persevere to toil on it until you are appeased. I guess that whole thing means if you're not happy with what I've done, send it back to me and I'll work on it until you are, or until it's okay. You know, actually, if I was going to rewrite it, I would rewrite it in what one of my Russian students once called so primitive English, because a lot of the time, even advanced level English is quite simple, particularly kind of spoken or writing, which is like speech, as these kinds of communications would be. So, as I said, when I first read it, it felt weird to me. And I felt, well, that's not how you use hanker. That's not how you use first rate. That's not how you use asserted. That's not how you use tongue or premium or counselled or petite or befitting. They're using all these words slightly wrongly. I then thought, well, interesting. How do you use a word like appeased? It's not a common word. If any of you are watching this thinking, I don't actually know what that word means myself, don't panic. I would say it's a kind of post-proficiency level word. It's a word that I'm more familiar with from written English and from history than I am from my everyday speech. But this felt wrong. And yet when I Googled, the first 4 examples I found from corpora were these. Can we truly afford to believe that somehow vicious extremists could be appeased. The government's offer has not appeased many separatist groups. The gods could be appeased by animal sacrifices. And banks were appeased by this cost-cutting effort. So you see that appeased has this idea of kind of keeping angry or dangerous people happy for a limited period of time. And there's also this idea that it's kind of a waste of time, because if you give them something now, they come back wanting more later. You give them animal sacrifices, they'll want more animals next week, or they'll want you to sacrifice your daughter, or they'll want the children of the village. Banks were appeased by this cost-cutting effort for now, but later, banks being banks, they'll come back wanting more. What's also interesting is the grammar and the collocation here. So we talk about appeasing separatist groups, extremists, gods, and banks. It's also often used passively. So 3 out of the 4 examples here were passive: could be appeased, were appeased. Back here, when we had that other example, until you are appeased, okay, it's passive, but it's in the kind of present simple, like using it as an adjective in some kind of way. And very few of the common examples that I could find used it in that sort of way. So what this must mean is something that a guy called Michael Hoey talks about. Michael Hoey was a professor of linguistics at Liverpool University, and he wrote a wonderful book called Lexical Priming, a new theory of how words work and languages change. And in this book, he basically said that all of our encounters with and our experiences of words in action in communicative contexts shape or condition or prime us to expect those words to work in some kind of similar way in the future. So when you say, well, that just doesn't feel right, the word doesn't work like that, how do you know? Well, because I've never seen it work like that before. That's not what we use the word to do. I know this because I've been primed or conditioned in certain ways to expect the word to work in particular kinds of contexts, with particular kinds of grammar, and with particular kinds of other words. And so for me, I've been primed to expect a word like hanker, or, appease, or petite to work in a very particular way that's being broken in those letters that you just saw from the Jonathan Safran Foer novel. Now, you might be thinking, this all sounds very abstract and very remote from the classroom. What's this got to do with me? I'd suggest actually that if you accept these ideas, they have quite profound implications for the classroom. And one implication is that showing students examples of how we actually use the language is at least as important as explanations of meaning. And I think often when students ask us, what does something mean? What they often mean is, yeah, teacher, can you explain this to me? And can you show me how to use this in the way in which it's being used here? And as a teacher, that requires a kind of change of mindset, because it basically means recognizing that some of our power as teachers comes from our ability to exemplify what we know about how language works, and that we can act as a kind of shortcut. We can condense all our own experience of seeing and using and hearing and reading language into input which is of maximum utility to our students. So I think this really means thinking about giving better examples as a starting point for teaching vocabulary better. So if we return to these phrasal verbs that I talked about earlier, okay, fall out, break into, get away, arrest for, not technically a phrasal verb, but verbs with dependent prepositions here, charge somebody with something. If we return to these, and I now think about how I would approach that lesson, one thing I wouldn't do is just give very basic explanations and write this up on the board. What I would be doing as part of my planning, actually, when I'm checking the answers in my head and making sure when I'm going through, I know what the answers are, I'm also thinking about how am I going to explain things students aren't sure of, and what examples am I going to write up on the board or in my Word document if I'm teaching on Zoom that gives students more information about how those words work. And now what I would do is I would give students the exercise. I'd go round, I'd check, I'd see how they're getting on, I'd put them in pairs to compare their ideas. And as I'm going through the answers, I'll be checking, right, number one, yeah, fall out with, good, okay. I might give a brief explanation. So if you fall out with someone, you have a big argument and then you stop talking, okay? You know, I'm not talking to him anymore. I've fallen out with him. Still a little bit of acting, but less dramatic running around the room, and a more detailed, contextualized kind of explanation. What I'm then thinking about is, as students are doing the exercise, getting things up on the board that I can work with as I'm going through the answers. So as I'm going through the answers, I'm kind of filling in the gaps. I'm working with what students had problems with, and I'm layering their knowledge or exposure to or understanding of how the language works. So I might write up on the board, yeah, we fell out about money because I lent him £200 and he never paid me back, and we had a big row about it and we haven't spoken since. I might also gap some of these words. So I might leave a gap. Instead of writing lent, I might just gap that. I might gap paid. I might gap spoken. Okay. And as I'm going through, I might say, yeah, so we fell out about money because I him £200 and he never gave me the money. Not borrowed. He borrowed the money. So I lent him. Good. And he never not returned me back. If you borrow money from someone, yeah, you pay them back. So he never paid me back. Good. We had a big row and we haven't spoken since. Good. What tense is it? Present perfect. Good. Why? From the past to now. Good. Just checking. With things like broke into. Yeah, so maybe we got burgled last year. They broke into my flat while I was at work and they stole my TV, DVD machine. Oh, very, very annoying. Again, I might gap something like stole here, okay, and elicit it from the students as I'm going through. The police have arrested 3 men and charged them with robbery after the bank robbery last year. And I would be looking definitely to write these longer kind of mini story messages using the vocabulary that I'm looking at, thinking about what I would do with this vocabulary, what my students might want to do with this vocabulary, what they might hear being done with this vocabulary, and thinking about the collocations and thinking about the colligations. Yeah, another example. Some guys robbed a bank in the centre of town last week. They got away with over £1 million in cash. They stole it, they escaped, they haven't been caught yet. They still have the £1 million in cash. What you've seen me do here is parts 1 and 2 of what I've come to call the triple X rule. Makes it sound a bit sexier and a bit more exciting if you call it the triple X rule, but it's not actually that exciting. But it basically means explaining the new language in the context in which the students have encountered it. So, you know, if you get away with £1 million in cash after a bank robbery, you steal it, you escape, you keep it, you don't get caught. It means giving another example, a kind of similar but slightly different example to what the students have seen in the exercise book or in the material that they're working with. And then what it means is using the students to expand upon the examples. And I'll talk you through how I would do that. So what it means is, as I'm going through and saying, right, number 1, yeah, fell out with, good. if you fall out with someone, you have a big argument, you stop talking to them. For example, we fell out about money. I lent him £200. He never paid me back. We had a big row. We haven't spoken since. I might then ask, any other reasons why people fall out apart from money? Okay. And if students say things like, women, you go, yeah, okay, you could fall out about a woman. Okay. Why? What's the situation? Both love, one get. And you go, yeah, okay. So maybe you and your friend, you both fancy the same girl, but he ends up going out with her and you don't, and you have a big row and you fall out about it. Any other reasons? Politics. Yeah, you can. I fell out with my dad quite badly about Brexit. If you fall out about politics, why? For example, yeah, maybe you have very different points of view about a controversial topic. And every time you talk about it, you argue. And in the end, you stop talking. Good. I then ask these kinds of questions as I'm going through. So if you have fallen out with someone and you want to be friends again, what needs to happen? Well, first, yeah, one of you needs to say sorry. So you need to apologize. Good. In my experience, it's usually the other person that needs to apologize first. And then you make up. Good. You become friends again. Okay. You can break into someone's apartment. Anywhere else you can break into. A bank. Yeah, I guess you could. How? Yeah, maybe if you make a tunnel and you tunnel into the bank, you can break into it. Oh, yeah, okay. If you have a bomb and you blow a hole in one of the walls, yeah, you can. Anywhere else? A car. Yeah, you can break into a car. And what might you steal if you break into a car? Okay. What happens if you're arrested and the police decide not to charge you? Yeah, they let you go. You're released without charge. Good. Can you think of 5 other things you can be charged with apart from robbery? So you can be arrested and charged with. And again, when students are answering these kind of questions, if you're in a monolingual classroom and you're a bilingual teacher, your students might answer these questions using L1. So they might kind of go, I don't know the word in English, but how do you say blah, 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 blah? And you go, yeah, okay, you've got the right idea. Anyone know how to say that? No? That's manslaughter in English. My students often, because I teach multilingual groups generally, not exclusively, but generally, they'll often say, oh, how to say, don't pay tax because lie. You go, yeah, okay. So he was arrested and charged with tax evasion. Okay, good. How to say kill but not want kill. Yeah, okay. He was arrested and charged with, anyone? Manslaughter. Good. Okay. So you can either use basic English versions or you can use L1 versions and help them say these things in English. And what you then end up with is more examples. So as I'm working through and I'm asking students questions and they're volunteering all these ideas, I might end up with something like, we fell out about a girl. I really fancied her. He ended up going out with her. Ugh. It's okay now, though. We've made up and they've split up. So it's okay. Someone broke into my car last night and stole the stereo, stole my iPhone, stole a handbag that I'd left on the back seat. He was released without charge after 5 hours of questioning. He was arrested and charged with rape, murder, manslaughter, drink driving, possession of illegal drugs. And I would be kind of using the students' ideas and reworking those ideas, rewording those ideas to help them say these things better. And what they're getting here is the grammar that often goes with these words and the other words which often go with these words, and a much clearer sense than I used to provide them with of the contexts in which they will be heard and in which they will be used. You might be thinking, oh, sounds like a lot of work. Well, it is in some ways, okay? It's obviously more work than just saying, number 1, good, fall out with. Number 2, wrong. It should be get away with. That's not teaching. That's just being a human answer key. If you want to teach, you need to help students do more with the language and understand more about how the language works. And this idea that, less is more. Well, that's a lovely idea if you're running an expensive French restaurant in Paris selling nouvelle cuisine, or if you're a kind of, a minimalist selling Marie Kondo courses or something. I think in language teaching, more is actually more. And the longer examples help students in many different ways because the context in which you will use them is much clearer and the context is clear. I mean, you imagine if you only learn to be arrested or even he was arrested, I was arrested. If you learn that, but you don't learn any of the words which often go with arrested, it's useless. Imagine, you're in England studying and you phone your school. Teacher, help, I have a problem. I've been arrested. Oh no, why? I don't know. You didn't teach me any English to talk about this situation. You just taught me to be arrested. Well, that's pretty useless. If you just learn, we fell out. Oh no, why? I don't know. My teacher didn't give me any context to actually help me discuss this situation. So the longer examples give you the context, they give you the language that's often used around the language that you want, that you're presenting the students with. In addition to this, the extra language actually makes life easier because it consolidates and clarifies meaning. You imagine if you learn to be fired, to be sacked, okay? You go home and you think, I'd better do a little bit of revision. You open your notebook and it says to be sacked, to be fired. Well, if you're lucky, you look at that and you think, yeah, I remember the meaning. Close your book, go on the internet. If you're unlucky, you look at that and you think, oh God, yeah, my teacher was talking about this in class today. No idea what it means. There's nothing here to help me. If you have, he was fired, he was sacked from his last job for being late all the time. He was sacked from his last job for punching the boss. Well, that extra language helps you to clarify the meaning of he was sacked from a job for doing something bad, okay? On top of all of that, this way of approaching vocabulary teaching leads to better grammar acquisition. When I was just writing to be fired or, to get away with something, there's no grammar there and there's no recycling or revisiting of language that students have already encountered. When I'm giving the longer examples, they're not only getting constant exposure to grammar in use, grammar in action, and so slowly over time developing their understanding of, yeah, we haven't spoken since, from the past to now, present perfect. Yeah, I remember now. They're also getting recycling of extra vocabulary. So, not borrowed, lent. Good, you remembered, just checking. You keep that language ticking over in the students' minds. And in addition, you are catering for the different strengths and needs of the students in your class, because not everyone's going to remember everything, okay? And they're certainly not going to produce everything. But if all you're doing is writing 5 verbs to get away with, to fall out with on the board, for the strong students, where's the challenge? There's no challenge there. If you're writing all these extra examples, for the strong students, there's more meat to take away. There's more for them to get their teeth into. There's more for them to, digest and reuse themselves when they want. In addition, the longer examples connect the classroom to the real world. Students might say, what do you call that thing that the mayor's just been arrested for? And you say, oh yeah, fraud. Yeah, so he was arrested and charged with fraud. So it makes it more locally relevant, more immediate. It helps the student connect the classroom language to the outside world. And it leaves space for students' own stories and students' examples. I was doing pass out once, and I asked the group any other reasons why you might pass out. And one of my students said, Justin Bieber. It's like, well, what's the connection between Justin Bieber and passing out? And this student told me that when Justin Bieber first came to Korea, she was a teenage belieber, as I now know Justin Bieber fans are called. And she got tickets for his concert, but it was so hot and there was such a crush near the front of the stage that she passed out just before he came on stage. And they carried her to the medical room and she missed the whole concert. So we had this whole story of her tragic failure to see Justin Bieber in concert in South Korea, which was a wonderful story that I would never have got had I not asked any other reasons why maybe people fall out. So these extra examples elicit more from students and allow more space for students' lives and existences. I'm going to wrap up there. I'm going to just finish by drawing your attention to these useful websites for ELT Resources, where you can find the Gallery Teachers Workshops and CPD sessions. The links up there. Please do check them out. Yeah, so colligation is basically the grammatical patterns that attach themselves to words. It's like the microgrammar of individual words. And I think it's important for several reasons. One is just because we don't discuss it enough in English language teaching. I don't think many teachers are conscious of it. I don't think we are trained enough to think about how we deal with it in our teacher talk and in our board work. And it's important because words colligate differently in different languages, okay? So as I was saying earlier, you know, what might be an active verb in one language will be a passive verb in another language. Students often get frustrated because they study lots of big grammar, by which I mean things like the present simple, the present continuous, the first conditional, the passive, going to and will. And they do all of that kind of Raymond Murphy's English grammar in use grammar. But when they try to speak, they have problems because words don't collocate in the way that they do in their first language. You know, this morning, one of my Russian students said, I have a strong headache. It's like, you mean bad headache? She said, yeah, can I say strong? No. Why? Well, because in English, you don't talk about strong headaches. It's not a collocation. You know, you can have strong alcohol. Maybe the next day you have a bad headache. It doesn't give you a strong headache. So often words don't work in the way that you want them to, because in one language they collocate one way, in another language they collocate another way. And it's the same for the grammatical patterns. So, you know, my Japanese students might say something like, this weekend, I was stolen my mobile phone, okay? What they mean is someone stole my mobile, or I had my mobile phone stolen. And what they're doing is they're bringing over the exact pattern from L1 to L2. And that's not a problem that studying something like Raymond Murphy's English grammar in use or doing more work on the present perfect or anything like that is going to solve. In the same way, the students who say things like, I don't know, you know, something bad has been happened on Oxford Street. That's not a problem of not knowing how to use the present perfect properly. That's a problem of thinking that happen colligates passively in English, because that's probably how it colligates in the first language, and it doesn't work like that in English. And I see this all the time with students. One of my students this morning, again, proficiency level student, said, I was recommended to me, okay, because in Russian you make that passive, like, you know, a place was offered to us by. In English, you'd usually just do it with a kind of dummy subject, like someone recommended him to me, okay? Or, you know, he was recommended to me, but not I was recommended him by somebody. The meaning's basically the same. The colligation is different, yeah? In lots of languages, you say things like, I feel myself relaxed in the countryside. Okay, because in some languages it's a reflexive verb, in English it isn't. All of those kinds of areas are colligation. On top of all of that, I think, there's also the fact that different meanings of the same word colligate differently. So if you take a word like cause, okay, as a noun, the most common meaning of cause is something that makes another thing happen. And this meaning of cause has very particular grammatical features. It's usually used with the, and it's usually followed by of, and then another noun. So you talk about, the causes of the First World War. I've got to write an essay on the causes of the First World War. The main cause of these accidents is drivers driving too fast. Well, once you change the meaning of cause, say you take the third most common meaning of cause, which is like an aim or an organization that's trying to do something in society that you think is probably a good thing or a bad thing. That has very different colligation. So that's usually used with zero article or indefinite articles. It more often comes at the end of a sentence, and it's used with a wider range of prepositions. So you might say something like, please give as much as you can. It's for a worthy cause. I'm not very sympathetic to their cause, okay? And I think what it means is just being conscious of all of these issues and using that consciousness to help you think more about what kind of examples you give students and what you point out to students, what you encourage students to notice as you meet these examples, whether that's in a course book, in a listening, or through your board work or teacher talking time. So that's why I think colligation is important. Well, I guess it depends what your expectations are. I don't expect that students are all going to learn, remember, reproduce, and start accurately using language as soon as I've taught it. I think this is based on the false idea that we present language, we get students to practice it, and then they start producing it, and that they build block on block on block like that. I don't think language acquisition works like that. The way I think about it is you're basically throwing the language into a kind of cement mixer, if you like. You're stirring it up, you're shaking it, you're keeping it moving, you're coming back to it, and it gets stickier in different places, in different ways for different people. I think on top of that, you do obviously need to recycle and revise language. And you just need to be realistic about the fact that some students will remember some things, some students will remember other things, some students will remember a hell of a lot, and some students won't remember that much. That's just the way it is. But nothing comes from nothing. And I think if you give students more meat to work with, they're more likely to feel more appreciative of what they're getting. And over time, because it's a process, you're more likely to see the results as things start to settle and get stickier.